Okay, let's talk about China's population. For years, it's been one of the biggest stories on the global stage. You know the headlines: demographic crisis, shrinking workforce, aging society. But what if this massive, unfolding story isn't quite what it seems?
What if that one big reason we all point to for this decline, the infamous one-child policy, what if that isn't really the main character in this story? What if the data tells us something way more interesting and, honestly, something that's way more relevant to all of us, no matter where we live?
See, for most of us, the story we learned is super straightforward. China's population was just exploding, right? So the government slammed on the brakes with this really radical authoritarian solution.
And on the surface, it makes total sense. Think about it. A country with over 1 billion people suddenly says, nope, you can only have one kid. Of course the birth rate is going to plummet, right? It's such a simple, powerful story, and it's been the headline for decades. But it might just be a little too simple. And this is where we have to push past the headlines and actually look at the data. Because the numbers, they tell a completely different story. It turns out the demographic cliff everyone talks about, well, it was already there before the one-child policy even started.
Okay, so take a look at this timeline. Back in 1970, the total fertility rate, that's TFR for short, was a massive 5.75 children per woman. Now jump forward to 1980. This is the year the one-child policy actually gets enacted. But by then, the TFR had already been chopped in half, down to around 2.7. The biggest, most dramatic drop happened before the policy we all point to. And a big reason for that was an earlier, much less famous campaign called Later, Longer, Fewer, which was all about encouraging people to get married later and have smaller families.
There's this quote from the source material that just hits the nail on the head. It says China's fertility didn't fall off a cliff because of the policy. The policy just jumped on a cliff that was already there. So the policy didn't cause the crazy drop, it just kind of locked in a trend that was already happening thanks to those earlier campaigns, urbanization, and all sorts of social changes.
So if the one-child policy wasn't the big bad wolf here, what was? Why did the birth rate keep on falling? And why is it still so low today, years after the policy was officially ended? Well, the real reasons are probably going to sound surprisingly familiar.
First off, the whole idea of parenting has just completely changed. Back in the 70s and 80s, and not just in China, but pretty much everywhere, kids were just out, They'd fend for themselves, be gone all day, show up for dinner. But today, especially for the urban middle class, parenting is this all-consuming, high-stakes project. One source called weekends a military logistics operation, just a constant race to ferry kids between endless lessons, tutoring, and sports. Sound familiar?
Then you've got the raw economics of it all. The cost of living and housing in big cities, it's just astronomical. You've got the intense 996 work culture, that's 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, which leaves you with basically zero time or energy. And on top of all that, there's the crazy cost of raising a competitive child, plus the fact that childcare for kids under 3 is virtually non-existent. You're relying on grandparents. For so many young people, the math, it just doesn't add up.
And let's not forget the huge social shifts. Women are more educated, more career-focused than ever before. Having kids isn't a given anymore, it's a choice. And here's a really fascinating twist. One of the unintended side effects of the one-child policy was that in cities, an only daughter suddenly got all the family resources that might have been split with a brother. This boosted her status and gave her way more power over her own life, including the choice of when or even if to have kids.
And this is where the story suddenly zooms out and isn't just about China anymore. It's about all of us. High costs, intense work culture, more opportunities and choices for women. Those fertility killers sound pretty familiar, don't they? That's because this is absolutely not just a China problem.
Just look at these numbers. The magic number for a population to replace itself is a fertility rate of 2.1. But look around. South Korea is at a jaw-dropping 0.72. The United States is down at 1.6. Even the Nordic countries, famous for being so family-friendly, are all below that replacement level. What we're looking at is a global phenomenon that seems to go hand in hand with economic development.
So, what does this all mean for the future? Well, this trend points to some pretty massive challenges. When you have an aging population, it puts a huge strain on everything. Pensions, healthcare, you name it. And the long-term economic picture starts to look really, really uncertain.
Just to give you a sense of the scale we're talking about, let's go back to China for a second. Some researchers project that at current rates, its population could crash from over 1.4 billion people today to just 525 million by the year 2100. That is a drop of almost 900 million people. The implications of that, they're just staggering to think about.
But against this really bleak backdrop of decline, a piece of news came out recently that made everyone sit up and pay attention. In early 2024, a report showed a small increase in births in China, the first one in 7 years. So the big question was, is this it? Is this the start of a comeback?
And the number itself wasn't tiny, an increase of 520,000 newborns compared to the year before. I mean, after year of nothing but decline, any number with a plus sign in front of it was going to make headlines.
But not so fast. Experts were really quick to jump in with some much-needed context. They're saying this little bump is mostly due to two things. First, a bunch of people who delayed getting married during the pandemic finally tied the knot. And second, it was the Year of the Dragon, which is a culturally super popular time to have a baby. So the consensus is that this is just a temporary blip, not some big reversal of the trend.
So, when you step back and look at the whole picture, this was never really just a story about one country's controversial policy. It's a story about a global pattern. It seems that as societies get wealthier, as education becomes more widespread, and as women gain more freedom and more choices, birth rates fall. And that leaves all of us with a massive unanswered question. Is a shrinking population just the inevitable price of progress?